You're watching Phantom Astronaut's Night Terrors, where folklore and fear intertwine to bring you tales that linger long after the lights go out. Tonight, we delve into the chilling tribal legends of the Wendigo, a creature born of hunger, desperation, and the frozen wilderness. This story will take you into the haunting origins of the Wendigo, told through the eyes of those who lived to speak of its terror. If you enjoy these journeys into the eerie unknown, remember to like, share, and subscribe to help the channel grow, and check the links in the description for more ways to support us. Now gather close and let us begin the story of the Wendigo. The wind howled through the dark pines like a mourning mother, its icy claws raking across the snow-covered expanse. In the heart of the northern wilderness, beyond the reach of maps or men, a group of Anishinaabe hunters huddled around a fire. The embers crackled and popped, casting flickering shadows on their weathered faces. It had been a brutal winter, the kind that sank its teeth deep and didn't let go. Game was scarce, and the provisions they had brought with them were long gone. Hunger gnawed at their bellies like a feral dog, and despair hung in the air, as thick as the smoke from their fire. One of the elders, a man named Megizi, sat apart from the group, his sharp eyes scanning the darkness beyond the firelight. He'd lived through winters like this before, seen what desperation could do to a man. But there was something different this time, something he couldn't quite name. The forest felt wrong. It was too quiet, the kind of silence that presses against your ears until you feel the need to scream, just to break it. Megizi's nephew, a young hunter named Awan, broke the silence with a nervous chuckle. "It's like the forest itself is hungry," he said, his voice trembling despite his attempt to sound lighthearted. Megizi didn't respond. He didn't have to. The other men shifted uncomfortably, their eyes darting to the trees, as though expecting something to emerge. The forest seemed to press closer, the shadows deepening, the cold biting harder. And then the whispers began. At first, they thought it was the wind, but the longer they listened, the clearer it became. It wasn't wind, it was voices, low, rasping like dry leaves scraping together. The words were indistinct, but the tone was unmistakable. Hunger. Awan stood abruptly, his hand going to the knife at his belt. "Who's out there?" he called, his voice echoing in the stillness. Megizi grabbed his arm, pulling him back toward the fire. "Sit down, boy," he said, his voice low and firm. "Don't give it attention." "What is it?" Awan asked, his eyes wide. Megizi hesitated. He didn't want to say it, didn't want to put the thought into words. But the others were looking at him now, their faces pale and gaunt in the firelight. "The Wendigo," he said finally, the word falling from his lips like a stone into a dark well. The men stiffened, their breath freezing in their throats. They all knew the stories. The Wendigo was no mere creature. It was a spirit of insatiable hunger, a force that corrupted and consumed. It was said to take root in the hearts of the desperate, turning them into monsters that would do the unthinkable to sate their ravenous appetites. Awan laughed nervously, though there was no humor in it. "That's just a story," he said. "A tale to scare children." Megizi didn't answer. He didn't have to. The whispers were growing louder. That night, the hunters took turns keeping watch, but none of them slept. The forest was alive with sounds, the crunch of snow, the snap of branches, the distant howl of something that wasn't a wolf. By morning, one of the men was gone. His footprints led away from the camp and into the forest, where they abruptly stopped as though he'd been plucked from the earth. The men searched for him, calling his name until their voices were hoarse, but there was no trace. The whispers grew bolder after that, calling each man by name. Migizi warned them not to answer, but it was hard. The voices were so familiar, so intimate, like loved ones beckoning them home. One by one, the men began to unravel. Awan was the first to break. He claimed he saw his mother standing at the edge of the clearing, her arms open wide, her face radiant with love. "She's waiting for me," he said, his voice thick with emotion. Migizi tried to hold it back, but Awan was strong, his hunger giving him a desperate strength. Migizi watched helplessly as his nephew vanished into the trees, the shadows swallowing him whole. His screams came moments later, high and piercing, and then silence. By the third night, only Migizi and two others remained. They were gaunt, their eyes hollow, their bodies trembling from the cold and hunger. The whispers had become a roar, a cacophony of voices promising food, warmth, salvation. And then it appeared. The Wendigo was tall, impossibly so, its emaciated body stretched and distorted, like a corpse left too long in the sun. Its skin was pale and mottled, clinging to its bones like parchment. Its eyes burned like twin embers, and its mouth, God, its mouth was too wide, filled with jagged, broken teeth. It stood at the edge of the firelight, watching them, its breath visible in the frigid air. Migizi felt a wave of nausea roll over him, the stench of decay and rot filling his nostrils. He gripped his knife, though he knew it was useless. The Wendigo wasn't a creature that could be fought. It moved with unnatural speed, lunging for one of the men. Migizi turned away as the screams began, the sound of tearing flesh and cracking bones filling the air. When he looked again, the Wendigo was gone, and so was the man. Migizi and the last hunter, a man named Nabe, knew they wouldn't survive the night. The Wendigo was too strong, too relentless, but they weren't going to go quietly. They built up the fire, the flames roaring into the sky, and stood shoulder to shoulder, their knives glinting in the firelight. The Wendigo circled the clearing, its eyes glowing in the darkness, its movements unnaturally fluid. When it attacked, it was like a force of nature, unstoppable, overwhelming. Nabe was dragged into the shadows, his screams cutting off abruptly. Migizi was alone now, his chest heaving, his heart pounding in his ears. The Wendigo stepped into the firelight, its gaze locking onto him. Migizi met its eyes, and for a moment thought he saw something human there, a flicker of sorrow, of torment. But then its mouth opened, and it spoke, its voice a low, guttural rasp. "You called me," it said. Migizi didn't respond. He tightened his grip on his knife, knowing it was useless, knowing it wouldn't matter. The Wendigo lunged. Migizi was found days later by another hunting party, wandering the forest, his eyes glazed, his mind shattered. He wouldn't speak of what he'd seen, but his body bore the scars, deep, ragged gouges across his chest, as though he'd been marked. The legend of the Wendigo spread far and wide, the tale of a creature born of hunger and desperation, a warning of what happens when men stray too far into the darkness. Even now, the whispers persist. In the deepest woods on the coldest nights, some say you can hear them, soft, rasping, calling your name. Thank you for joining me on this harrowing journey into the legend of the Wendigo. If tonight's episode of Phantom Astronaut's Night Terrors sent chills down your spine, remember to like, share, and subscribe to help the channel grow. Don't forget to check the links in the description for more ways to support us. This has been Phantom Astronaut's Nocturnal Tales. I'll see you out there.